2 hours after I bought my cabin in the Montana woods, my daughter-in-law called. She said, "We're coming with 30 people. Get the rooms ready, get the food ready. No, please, no warning." After 6 years of living like an unpaid maid in their basement, I thought I had found peace. I was wrong. I was still unpacking plates when their cars rolled in like a parade. They barged in, laughed, spilled wine, and treated my home like a cheap motel. So I did what I had never done before. I stood up, and I fought back. But how far did I go to take it all back? I had just finished sliding the last dish into the kitchen cabinet when I heard the first engine rumble up the dirt road. I looked out the window and saw a silver SUV kicking up dust, followed by a line of cars so long it wrapped around the bend near the pine trees. I didn't even have time to sit down or take a sip of water. 2 hours. That was all it took. 2 hours between buying this cabin and becoming their unpaid host again. Maya had called me like she always did. No emotion, no space for reply. Just a cold, clipped voice. "We're coming. 30 people. Get the rooms ready. Get the food ready." And now they were here. Car doors slammed. Voices echoed through the trees. A boy about 10 ran up the porch steps and pushed the front door open before I could reach it. Behind him, 2 women carried tote bags and yoga mats. A man tossed a beer cooler onto my wooden floor like it was a campsite. One woman looked around and asked where the towels were. Another opened the fridge, frowned, and muttered about the lack of oat milk. It was like I had never left that basement. I stood near the kitchen counter, hands still damp from unpacking the last box of plates, and watched them move through my house. They didn't knock. They didn't look me in the eye. They didn't congratulate me. They didn't even say hello. They scattered. Upstairs, downstairs, into the pantry, into the bedrooms. A girl in a pink hoodie flopped face first onto my couch with muddy shoes still on. Maya's aunt claimed the master bedroom without asking. I could hear her telling someone on the phone that the view from the upstairs window was better than she expected. I didn't say a word. Not yet. It's strange, the way silence fills a place. I had only spent 2 nights in that cabin, but I remembered how still it had felt before the invasion. The quiet hum of the wind through pine needles, the slow ticking of the old wall clock I had brought with me from the city, the smell of fresh wood, the faint creak of the porch with every step. All of it was gone now. One of Maya's cousins turned on music from a portable speaker and cranked the volume high. Trevor, my son, walked in a minute later with Emily beside him. She smiled softly at me, her eyes unsure. But Trevor avoided my gaze. He dropped a bag by the stairs and gave me a quick nod like I was a receptionist behind a desk. I counted 33 people. Not 30, 33. Maya had undercounted. Or maybe she just didn't care. I took a breath and walked toward the front door. But before I could reach it, Maya blocked the hallway with a confident smile on her face. "Only 2 weeks, Lorraine. Be flexible." Her hand touched my shoulder like a pat on the head. I looked at her, then past her, to the living room that now smelled like spilled wine and cheap perfume. Flexible. I had been flexible when they asked me to move into the basement. I had been flexible when they said it was temporary. I had been flexible for 6 years while I packed school lunches, cleaned their toilets, folded their laundry, and slept in a room without a window. This was not flexibility. This was theft. And I had finally reached my limit. I turned away from Maya, walked into the guest room that was supposed to be mine, and closed the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't cry. I opened the drawer of the nightstand, took out my yellow notebook, and started writing. I wrote the number of people. I listed who took which room. I noted the noise level. I listed who had walked in with muddy shoes, who spilled wine, who had left the bathroom door wide open. Every action, every offense, every detail. Because this time, I wasn't going to stay silent. If you're still listening and you've ever felt like your family forgot who you were, I hope you stay with me. I'm not telling this story to complain. I'm telling it because something happened in that cabin that changed everything. And this time, I was ready. Ready to fight. Ready to reclaim. And most of all, ready to end the silence. I woke up the next morning before the sun touched the tops of the pines. The cabin was quiet for once, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm has passed through and wrecked everything. I sat up in bed, in the smallest room of the house, the one I had claimed before Maya's people could snatch it. The mattress was thin, and the window barely opened, but it was mine. I swung my legs over the side, stood, and rolled my neck. My body was tired, but my mind was sharp. I had already made the decision the night before. Now it was just a matter of executing it. I dressed quietly, careful not to wake the bodies scattered in the hallway outside. Someone had left their boots in front of my door. I stepped over them. The living room was a mess. Empty bottles, crumbs, a towel thrown across the couch, a half-eaten sandwich left on my windowsill. The fridge door was open just a crack. I pushed it closed and wiped the handle with the sleeve of my sweater. Then I walked to the end of the kitchen counter, opened the drawer where I kept my important things, and pulled out my yellow notebook. I flipped to a fresh page. 7:12 a.m. Main bedroom, claimed by Aunt Denise. Guest room 1, Maya's cousin and boyfriend. Guest room 2, 4 teenagers, all under blankets, floor and bed. Living room, 2 more, 1 snoring, kitchen damage, coffee spilled on rug, wine ring on oak table. Fridge, no oat milk, but 5 opened beer cans. I kept writing. I noted what I had seen, what I had smelled, what I had cleaned already. Every time I wrote a line, I felt more in control. I was no longer surviving this. I was documenting it. Then I made the 2 phone calls. First, to Deputy Ruiz. Her voice was steady. She said she remembered me from the ranger station back in the old days. She said she'd be at the cabin by 10, and that I should prepare whatever documentation I had. Second, I called the fire marshal's office. A man named Coleman answered. I told him how many guests were in the house. I mentioned the outdoor grill, the number of cars, the location of the cabin near the trees. He paused for a moment, then told me to expect him by 11. I hung up and placed the phone face down on the counter. The clock on the wall ticked softly. I stared at it for a while, then reached for a roll of tape and began printing. 1 page at a time, I printed copies of the short-term occupancy agreement I had downloaded months ago when I was still fantasizing about renting out a spare room to hikers or writers. It had 3 simple sections: per night fee, damage responsibility, and house rules. I adjusted the amount. I printed 33 copies. After that, I made signs. Private area, authorized access only, short-term occupancy contract required beyond this point. I taped the signs to doors and walls. I laid the agreements on the dining table, 1 for each plate setting. I placed a pen beside every copy. Then I sat down in my chair at the end of the table and waited. The first person to wake up was one of the teenagers. She stumbled into the kitchen, saw me sitting there, and gave a sleepy half smile before reaching for a mug. Then she looked at the table and stopped. "What's all this?" she said, but I didn't respond. More people trickled in. 1 cousin, then another. Maya came down the stairs last, her hair in a bun, holding her phone in one hand and a granola bar in the other. She saw the signs. Then she saw me. Then she saw the stack of contracts on the table. "What is this?" she said. I stayed silent. Trevor appeared behind her, blinking like he had just realized where he was. He looked from Maya to me to the signs. His shoulders tensed. Ruiz arrived at exactly 10. She knocked on the door, but it was already open. She stepped inside, nodded at me, and glanced around. Then she pulled out her notepad. At 11, the fire marshal pulled into the driveway. He wore sunglasses and a stiff expression. He stepped inside, took one look at the room, and said he needed to see the septic permit. I handed him the laminated copy I had on hand. He did the math, checked the bathroom count, and looked back at me. "Overcapacity," he said. Maya started to argue, but Ruiz raised a hand. She asked me if I had record of how many people had been sleeping on site. I opened my notebook and handed it over. She flipped through the pages slowly. Then she turned to Maya. "This house has legal occupancy limits," she said, "and right now you're exceeding them." That's when the first crack appeared in Maya's face, a small twitch near her mouth, a flicker of something behind her eyes. I stood up, walked to the end of the table, and tapped on the contracts. "These are the terms," I said. "Anyone who wants to stay needs to sign." Maya looked around, expecting someone to laugh. No one did. Trevor shifted uncomfortably. Emily appeared in the hallway, watching from a distance, eyes wide. No one said anything. Not yet. The room filled slowly, one person after another, stepping into the kitchen like nothing was out of place. Like there weren't contracts spread across the dining table. Like there weren't legal signs taped to doors. I sat at the head of the table, my yellow notebook closed in front of me, my hands folded. I didn't speak. I waited. Maya entered last, still holding her phone in her left hand. She glanced at the signs again, then at me. Then she picked up one of the contracts. Her eyes moved across the page. The corners of her mouth curled just slightly like she was about to laugh. She didn't laugh. Instead, she leaned against the back of a dining chair and looked at everyone else. Most of them were holding copies of the contract now. A few were whispering, confused, glancing toward the fire marshal and Deputy Ruiz, who both stood quietly in the corner. Maya raised her voice, but not by much. She called it ridiculous, said it was just family, just a weekend, that I was making a scene out of nothing. She looked straight at me and told me I needed to relax. Then she turned to her cousin, one of the loud ones, and said that I must have lost my mind living alone in the woods. Nobody laughed. I stood up. My hands didn't shake. I walked over to the kitchen island and picked up the small black remote that controlled the house cameras. I clicked it once. The screen on the wall came to life. A clip began to play. It was footage from 2 days earlier. Maya's voice, clear and sharp, giving directions. "Bring as many as you want. My mother-in-law just bought some cabin in the woods. She thinks it's hers. We'll show up like a surprise party. She won't say no. She never does." The audio was perfect. I had downloaded it the night before and trimmed it to 20 seconds. That was all I needed. The room went silent. Trevor shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Emily stood halfway down the hall, watching. Maya didn't move. She stared at the screen. Her smile was gone. Then she spoke again. She said I was being manipulative, that the clip was out of context, that families joke around, that I was embarrassing myself. I picked up the remote and turned off the screen. Then I placed the remote down beside the notebook and walked to the center of the room. This is my house, and starting today, it's going to be treated like one. Deputy Ruiz cleared her throat. She stepped forward and reminded everyone that the fire marshal had already issued a warning about the septic limits, that they were currently in violation, that if it wasn't corrected, citations would be issued. Coleman nodded. He said he'd seen enough. Said there were too many cars on the property, too many bodies in beds and couches and even on the floor. Said it was unsafe. Said it was against county code. Maya's cousin tried to argue, but Ruiz cut him off. Any event, whether it's family or not, has to follow local laws. That includes occupancy, fire safety, and noise limits. Then she turned to me. Do you want to proceed with formal complaints? I nodded. Ruiz said she would begin writing citations. Coleman said he'd return in 2 hours with a formal notice. Maya's face changed. I saw it happen. The switch. The crack. The part of her that believed she could always spin things, always twist words, always turn a crowd. It faltered. She looked toward Trevor, waiting for him to say something. He didn't. She looked toward Emily. Emily didn't move. Then Maya laughed. Not a loud laugh. The kind people do when they're trying to make others feel uncomfortable. She picked up a pen and scribbled something across the bottom of the contract. Fine. If that's what it takes for her to stop acting crazy. She dropped the pen and turned toward the stairs. Several others followed her. Some signed without a word. A few refused and walked out to the cars. One by one, the group began to split. I sat back down. My notebook stayed closed. My eyes didn't blink. My spine stayed straight. The silence that returned was heavier than any shouting could have been. That night, they didn't blast music. They didn't drink on the porch. They didn't spill anything. They stayed in their rooms. And for the first time since they arrived, I slept without locking my door. After the contracts were laid out and the video had played, things got quiet. Not calm, just quiet. It was that brittle kind of silence, like ice right before it cracks. People drifted off, some back to their rooms, some outside to make phone calls. Maya had signed the paper, but she hadn't said another word to me. She disappeared upstairs, and I could hear the bedroom door close harder than it needed to. I didn't follow her. I didn't explain. That part of me was done. I stayed at the table, gathering the leftover papers, stacking them neatly. One pen had a cracked cap, another had a chewed end. I replaced both. Then I walked through the cabin, checking every posted sign to make sure nothing had been peeled off or moved. Upstairs, someone was whispering angrily into a phone. A woman's voice, sharp and fast. I caught my name once, then it cut off when she realized I was nearby. By the time I made it outside, the wind had picked up. It swept through the trees like it had something to say. I stood on the porch for a long time. The forest had that stillness I used to love, but now it felt like the whole mountain was holding its breath. At noon, I made lunch. Nothing fancy. Just soup and bread. I didn't invite anyone. I left it on the counter with a note. Help yourself. Only 3 people came to the table. Emily was one of them. She didn't say mo, but she brought her bowl back when she was done and washed it without being asked. That small gesture meant more than anything her parents had done in years. By late afternoon, the unease had turned into tension. Maya came down, dressed sharp this time, makeup on. She looked ready for a stage, not for a conversation. She didn't speak to me directly. She gathered a group of her friends and went out to the deck. I watched from the kitchen as she pointed at the posted signs and laughed with the others. One man was filming her with his phone. She pulled out a mic, clipped it to her shirt, and began recording something of her own. Her voice carried into the house, louder than necessary. I could hear phrases, words like overreaction, mental decline, toxic behavior. I heard my name again. Then came the part that turned my stomach. She pointed toward the house and said she had tried to help me for years, that I had rejected family support. that I was lashing out because I couldn't handle being alone. I didn't storm out there. I didn't yell. I walked to the hallway closet and pulled out the second security camera box. I had installed it in the back just last week, covering the deck. I opened the app, hit record, and documented every word she said. It was slander, public, deliberate. Later that evening, I forwarded the clip to Fire Marshal Coleman and Deputy Ruiz, along with a copy to my attorney. It was a short email, no commentary, just the facts. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake listening to footsteps upstairs, water running, someone coughing near midnight. At 3 in the morning, a door slammed. At 4, I heard voices outside. At 5, I got up. I stepped outside and found cigarette butts on the porch. Wine bottles lined up on the railing like trophies. Someone had scribbled on the wooden railing with a marker. Inside, the kitchen smelled sour. I opened the trash and found food mixed with cans, napkins soaked in grease, and what looked like melted chocolate all over the floor near the fridge. I didn't speak. I didn't write it down. I cleaned it. Slowly, silently. But I wasn't doing it to keep the peace. I was documenting every damage for the cleaning invoice I'd already begun drafting. Around 7, Maya came down. Her phone was in her hand. She looked like she hadn't slept either. She saw me near the sink and walked past without a word. But her voice carried into the living room. She told someone on the phone that I was spiraling, that I had called law enforcement on my own family, that I was acting like a bitter old woman, desperate for control. I didn't turn around. I opened the cabinet, reached for the small binder where I kept hard copies of all legal notices and permits, and slid in the printed screenshot of her video. She might have had a bigger voice, but I had better records. By mid-morning, the air had shifted. Some of the guests were packing. Suitcases rolled over the gravel. Car doors slammed again. But this time, no one was smiling. A few people made excuses, work, emergencies, travel delays. But I knew what it was. The performance was over. The crowd was leaving. Maya still tried to keep control. She gathered those who remained and gave some sort of pep talk. I couldn't hear every word, but it was the same tone, the same confidence, as if she still believed she could spin this back around. That's when Mr. Callahan showed up. He was my neighbor, a man in his 70s who had lived in the next clearing over for more than 3 decades. He'd seen the parade of cars, the music, the fire pit smoke. He knocked once, stepped inside and tipped his hat. He told me the noise had reached his property line, that his dogs hadn't slept in 2 nights, that he had spoken to the county before, and if I needed him to file a statement, he would. I thanked him. He said he liked things quiet out here, said that people forget this isn't the city. Out here, things echo. Out here, people notice. He left with a nod, and with that, the line between family and witness became clearer than ever. I stood on the porch after he left, watching Maya's guests fade into the tree line. They came with wine and speakers and stories. Now they left with excuses. And Maya, standing alone on the deck, was still holding her phone, still pretending. But her voice was starting to crack. By late morning, the air in the cabin felt thick, like something invisible had settled in every corner. Tension clung to the walls. Even the sound of footsteps across the wood floor seemed quieter, as if everyone inside had realized the rules had changed. No one blasted music that day. No one laughed loudly. Most kept to themselves. But it wasn't peace. It was pressure. I sat at the dining table, the yellow notebook in front of me again. Pages already filled. I flipped to a blank sheet and wrote the date at the top. Then I noted the time. 10:43 a.m. A few more cars had left just after sunrise. I recorded license plates, counted bags, even logged the trash left behind. I wasn't obsessing, I was preparing. At 11 o'clock sharp, a white truck pulled into the driveway. Fire Marshal Coleman stepped out, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the property. He wore the same expression he had when he first visited. Professional, detached, focused. Behind him came a second vehicle, county code enforcement. I had not called them again, but apparently word travelled fast in towns like this. Coleman didn't knock. He walked straight to the porch, gave a polite nod, and spoke loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. He stated that a formal inspection was underway, prompted by previous occupancy concerns, septic overcapacity, and unregulated group events on private residential land. That was the moment Trevor finally stepped forward. He came out from the side of the house where he had been talking on the phone, his face pale. He told the marshal it was just a family gathering. He said it wasn't a rental, said no one paid to be there, that it was all a misunderstanding. Coleman listened, but he didn't nod. He asked to see the septic permit again, which I handed over. Then he pulled out a printed map and began comparing headcount estimates to system capacity. He pointed out clearly that the approved number was 8, maybe 10, with short stays. Not 30, not 43, which was what he estimated had stayed overnight across 2 days. Deputy Ruiz arrived minutes later in uniform. She stepped out of her cruiser with her tablet in hand. She greeted me with a nod, then turned to Coleman and began taking notes as he spoke. Trevor tried again to explain, but his voice lost steam. He looked toward the deck, maybe expecting Maya to come out and take over. She didn't. Instead, she stood behind the living room curtains, watching. I could see her shadow, frozen in place. Ruiz asked if I wished to file official complaints related to trespass, safety violations, and property misuse. I said yes. She opened a digital form and read the categories aloud. Unlawful occupation, property damage, septic overuse, excessive noise, fire hazard. Each one felt like a clean cut. When Ruiz finished, she turned toward Trevor. She asked if he was the legal tenant. He said no. She asked if he had the right to host large gatherings. He said no. Then she looked at me again and asked if I was prepared to enforce the boundaries of the property. I said I had already begun. While this happened, a group of Maya's friends, 4 of them, slipped out the back door with duffel bags. They didn't say goodbye. One of them knocked over a flower pot on the way out. They didn't stop to pick it up. I wrote that down too. The fire marshal began documenting visible signs of strain on the land, deep tire tracks in the gravel path, ash residue near the fire pit, despite the active burn ban, trash collected under the deck. When he checked the kitchen and saw the wine bottles and open containers, he paused, looked around, and wrote something on the form. He didn't say what. He didn't need to. Trevor stood off to the side, arms crossed. I couldn't read his face. He didn't try to stop anything, but he didn't help either. It was the same quiet inaction I had seen for years. The same silence when Maya interrupted me. The same blank look when I brought up how cold it was in the basement. I used to take that silence as neutrality. I saw it differently now. I saw it as approval by absence. Maya finally stepped out. She was composed at first, calm. She walked down the steps with her phone in one hand, her sunglasses in the other. She smiled faintly, like none of this was serious. She asked Ruiz if this was necessary, said that it was a family matter, that it could all be resolved with a conversation. Ruiz replied that it was no longer just family. There were county violations, legal boundaries, health risks. Maya's smile slipped. She turned toward me. Her voice dropped just a little. but it was still smooth. She said that I had blown this out of proportion, that I had made a private matter into a public disaster. She said that I was punishing her for something that happened years ago, that I was ruining everything to make a point. I looked her in the eye and said nothing. Then I reached into the folder on the counter, pulled out the latest printout of the group video she had posted earlier in the week, where she called the cabin a surprise family retreat and promoted it as a getaway spot for a future brand partnership. I handed it to Ruiz. Maya didn't try to deny it. Ruiz read it silently. Then she folded it and slid it into her tablet sleeve. She told Maya and Trevor that the county would follow up, that this was not over. The marshal gave his final notes. He said he would be filing a formal report, that fines were likely, that follow-up inspections would happen. Then he turned to me and asked if I had anything else to add. I said no. He tipped his head, handed me a copy of the preliminary findings, and walked out. Ruiz followed. The porch was still again. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Maya walked past me and back inside. Not a word. Trevor stayed behind a second longer. He looked at me. Just looked. Then he shook his head once, like it was too much for him, like he couldn't believe how far it had all gone. And then he went in too. I stayed outside. I looked down the driveway at the county vehicles pulling away, and I exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. The line had been drawn, and they had finally seen it. That afternoon, the house felt like a balloon stretched too tight. No one spoke much, but I could feel something shifting under the surface. Not regret, not guilt, just panic, quiet and pulsing, like a second heartbeat. Maya stayed upstairs most of the time, but I heard the murmur of her voice through the thin walls. She was on calls. Her voice dropped when she said certain names, sharpened when she talked about legal exposure. Every few minutes, I caught a word that made her intentions clear. Narrative, branding, reputation. I moved through the cabin slowly, taking photos. I didn't need more evidence for the county, but I wanted it for my own records. A wine stain on the hallway rug. A broken hinge on the bathroom cabinet. My name scratched faintly into the top of the coffee table with a key or coin. I sent the photos to a folder in my cloud storage, labeled clearly. Cabin damage. Week 1, around 2, Maya emerged. Her posture had changed. She walked faster, her expression stiff, composed. She wasn't the same person who had smirked through the contracts 2 days ago. This version of her was still proud, but thinner, forced. She sat on the couch and opened her laptop. Trevor joined her after a few minutes, standing behind the screen like he wasn't sure if he should sit or leave. Emily stood nearby, holding her sketchbook but not drawing. Then Maya started recording. She didn't announce it, but I recognized the setup. Frontal camera, natural light angled across her face, voice trained to sound polished but personal. She started speaking. Not to me, to her audience. She spoke about family, about conflict, about boundaries and mental health and being misunderstood. She made herself small in the story, just a daughter-in-law trying to help. She painted me as someone unraveling, lonely, angry, unwilling to accept love. It was all delivered in that smooth tone influencers use when they want to sound sincere, not overly emotional, not cold, just broken enough to pull sympathy from strangers. She didn't mention the fire marshal. She didn't mention the county. She didn't mention that she had violated multiple codes or that her guests had left without saying goodbye. I let her finish. I waited 10 minutes, then went to my room and opened my laptop. I uploaded the audio files I had saved from her deck conversation the day before. Then I sent them, along with the photos of property damage, to her event sponsor. the same one she had bragged about landing a deal with last month. I attached the document showing the septic limits, the noise complaints from the HOA, and the warning issued by the fire marshal. No commentary, just attachments. By 4 p.m., I received a reply. Short, 2 lines. We appreciate your concern. We will review the situation and respond accordingly. At 5, I heard Maya scream. Not loud, not long, just a sound that slipped out before she could stop it. A door slammed. Her footsteps moved fast across the floor. The living room went still. 30 minutes later, Trevor knocked on my door. He didn't come in. He just stood there. He said the sponsor had pulled out, that Maya had lost the contract, that she was blaming me. I didn't open the door. I didn't respond. That evening, the cabin went silent. No one cooked. No one played music. Maya's voice stayed trapped behind her bedroom door. Trevor paced the hallways, checking his phone every few minutes. Emily stayed with me. She helped sweep the kitchen. She wiped down the counters with small circular motions. I told her she didn't have to. She said she wanted to. Later that night, I stepped outside. The air was cold, the kind that settles into your bones. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching the last pink edge of daylight vanish behind the trees. I heard movement behind me. Maya. She stood at the threshold, wrapped in a long sweater, arms hugging herself. She looked out at the woods but didn't speak. For a long time we said nothing. Then she whispered that she had tried, that she was just trying to create something for her family, that I had always made her feel like an outsider. I didn't answer. I just looked at her. She waited for sympathy, for me to step toward her, for softness. I stayed where I was. Eventually, she went back inside. The next morning, I found her laptop open on the table. The recording from yesterday had been deleted. She never said a word about it. That afternoon, she began to pack. The makeup bags, the ring lights, the tripods, the branded tote bags, the folded papers she had once handed out to potential partners. All of it went into boxes. Trevor helped her but moved slow. His shoulders sagged in a way I hadn't seen before. Not tired, just lost. Emily stayed in the living room sketching. Maya left by evening. No goodbye, no explanation. Just the sound of the car engine fading into the trees. Trevor and Emily remained. And for the first time in nearly a week, I sat at the table with a full mug of coffee and didn't have to brace myself for what came next. The noise was gone. The walls breathed again. And I knew the worst was finally behind me. By the time the sun broke through the clouds the next morning, the cabin already felt different. Lighter, still, but not in the same way as the days before. This stillness was earned. It wasn't forced down by tension. It was the silence that follows a storm, when things are broken, but breathing again. I stood at the front window, sipping my coffee as I watched Trevor and Emily carry Maya's last 2 boxes out to the car. Emily moved slowly, her steps careful. She set the box down in the back seat like it carried something fragile. Trevor didn't say anything as he closed the trunk. He just looked at the gravel, then at the trees. Then he walked back to the house without glancing my way. Maya was gone. That much was clear, but her shadow still hung in the corners of the cabin. I could feel it in the smudges on the glass door, in the scent of perfume that still clung to the hallway. In the silence Trevor carried with him as he passed by. I had no intention of trying to fix what they had broken. Not yet. That would come later. First, I had to finish what I started. The invoice had been sitting on my desk since the night before. I had documented every item. I had triple-checked every line. The broken drawer handle in the guest bathroom, the stained throw blanket on the couch, the crushed lavender bush outside near the fire pit, every bottle cap left in the flower beds. I listed them all: the hours of cleaning, the time spent on the phone with county officials, the loss of use, the fine I would be paying myself for the burn ban violation they caused. I wasn't doing it to be petty. I was doing it because consequences mattered, because ignoring damage was what let people cause more. By 9 o'clock, I sent the invoice, one copy to Maya's email, one to her management contact, the one listed on her digital portfolio. I attached images. I attached the formal violation notice from the county. I did not write a message. I also sent a separate packet to the HOA, not to escalate, just to notify, as required. An hour later, my phone buzzed. I didn't pick up. I let it vibrate against the table. Then again. Then again. 3 calls in 10 minutes, all from Maya. Then the messages came. The first was cold, demanding proof, demanding itemization, claiming emotional distress. The second was longer, sharper, words about family, about betrayal, about legality. She used the word defamation. I didn't respond. Trevor stayed quiet that morning. He sat on the porch for a long time, his back hunched, elbows on knees. Emily sat beside him, saying nothing, just drawing again. Every now and then she showed him something, and he smiled. A real smile. Small, but real. I spent the afternoon repairing things. I cleaned the windows with slow, circular strokes. I scrubbed the wine stain on the hallway runner. I replaced the coffee table with one I had kept in the shed, older, heavier, but mine. I turned the mattress in the guest room and opened all the windows. I aired the place out until it smelled like pine again. Midday, a white envelope was dropped at my front door. No knock, no delivery van, just a hand-delivered letter. It was folded carefully, sealed in plain paper. The return address was from Maya's management office. Inside was a short letter from a legal assistant stating that Maya's team would be reviewing the claims and preparing a formal reply. There was no apology, just language, clean, cold. I scanned the letter, took a photo, and filed it in my folder. I didn't feel nervous. I felt confirmation. She was afraid now, not of me, but of accountability, of what it looked like when her version of the story didn't hold up under light. That evening I found Emily in the kitchen. She had set the table. 2 bowls, 2 glasses. Nothing fancy. She had made soup. Trevor was out walking the perimeter. He did that a lot now, looped around the clearing, never far, but always moving. Emily handed me a spoon. Her fingers were ink-stained, and her eyes didn't meet mine. We sat in silence for a long time. Then she said, softly, that she liked it here, that she didn't want to leave just yet. I nodded. She didn't need my permission, but I gave it anyway. Later that night, Trevor came inside. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, hat in hand. He looked tired, not just in the body, but all the way through. He said thank you, not for anything specific, just said it. Then he sat down with us. That was the first meal we had shared in 6 years. The next morning I sent one last email. It was to the cleaning company I had hired the year before to service the cabin once a month. I asked for a one-time deep clean, not because I couldn't do it myself, but because I didn't want to anymore. I had spent too long wiping up other people's messes. I wanted someone else to scrub the last layer of their presence out of my house. By mid-morning, I was back at my desk. The printer hummed softly as it produced the final copy of the invoice with a delivery receipt. I filed it, closed the folder, and placed it in the safe. There was nothing else to send, nothing left to demand. I had done it all. What remained was mine. The peace, the silence, the space. And I wasn't giving it up again. By the end of that week, the gravel driveway had returned to stillness. The soil by the edge of the porch had dried, no more tire marks from SUV wheels cutting ruts into soft earth. The air smelled clean again, resin and pine, cold in the morning, soft in the afternoon. The only footsteps on the deck were mine, and occasionally Emily's. The cabin was recovering, and so was I. But peace doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean forgiving right away, either. It means understanding where the line is and knowing exactly why you had to draw it. And that week, the line remained firm. Trevor stayed. He didn't say how long, he didn't make it a discussion. One morning, he simply told me the rental on their condo was ending early. Maya had taken what she wanted and moved in with a friend in Portland. Emily had asked to stay longer, and he said yes. That was it. I didn't push him. I didn't ask for more. I had no appetite for digging through someone else's consequences. He had chosen his silence too many times. If he wanted something different now, he would have to earn it. Not with apologies, but with presence. He helped around the property without being asked, hauled broken deck chairs into the truck bed for donation, replaced a loose gutter screw, picked up mulch from the hardware store and laid it down around the garden path without a word. I said thank you. That was enough. Emily started leaving little sketches around the house, pencil outlines of trees and animals and shadows. I found one of a fox curled beneath the woodpile, another of a hawk perched on the railing, drawn from memory. She never showed them to me directly. She just left them there like quiet notes of belonging. Then came the email. It was early afternoon when I checked my inbox. Subject line in all caps, response to invoice. The sender was someone I didn't know, a legal representative. The body of the email was short, but the attachment was 6 pages long. They disputed several line items. They argued the tone of the invoice was accusatory. They asked for photographic timestamps. They demanded clarification on what was meant by emotional damage to the homeowner. They said the figure was excessive, unreasonable. They included a sentence near the end that made me pause. The client reserves the right to pursue legal remedy for defamation and mischaracterization of events. I read it twice, then a third time. I didn't feel threatened. I felt tired. So I did what I always do. I documented. I printed the email. I highlighted key phrases. I clipped it to the rest of the paperwork and placed it in the red folder marked Cabin Incident. Then I opened my reply window. My response was brief. 1 paragraph. I restated the documented damage. I listed attached photos and inspection records. I reiterated the verified report from county officials. I noted the original copy of the invoice with delivery receipt. I reminded them of the expiration date for voluntary resolution. Then I hit send and closed the laptop. That evening, Mr. Callahan stopped by. He brought 2 mason jars of homemade pickles and said the rain forecast looked promising for the weekend. We stood near the fence line while he lit his pipe and told me the HOA meeting had mentioned my name. Not in judgment, in support. Said folks were tired of city types treating the mountain like a pop-up resort. Said someone finally standing their ground made them feel like the place might hold on to what made it worth living here in the first place. He left after 20 minutes, slow and steady down the dirt path. His visit left behind the smell of tobacco and the smallest spark of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Validation without noise. The next morning, I called my attorney, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted a statement ready in case Maya pushed further. I wanted to be prepared for the possibility that this would not end with silence. She answered on the 3rd ring and said she had already read the response. She wasn't surprised. She said people like Maya relied on intimidation through implication, that they rarely followed through because their case was thin once you stripped the emotion out of it. She told me I had done everything right. She told me to hold the line. So I did. I started compiling a closing file. I labeled it Final. I included photos of the house after the guests left, screenshots of texts, a printed transcript of the deck video, invoices, signed contracts, county reports. I backed everything up twice. By Friday afternoon, I walked through the house with fresh eyes. It looked like mine again. The scratches on the floors were covered with rugs. The cabinet doors had been oiled. The faint odor of old cologne had finally disappeared from the guest room. Trevor asked if he and Emily could help with dinner that night. I said yes. We made chili and cornbread. Nothing complicated, just warm and filling. We ate on the porch, and the wind came through the trees gently. Emily sat cross-legged on the step, sketching something I couldn't quite see. Trevor cleared the plates without being asked. For once, I didn't feel like I was hosting. I didn't feel like I was tolerating anything. I felt still and whole. That night, as I turned off the lights and locked the doors, I passed the wall where a small nail had been left behind after someone took down one of Maya's framed quotes. I didn't cover it. I let it stay. A quiet reminder that this house had been reclaimed, not just cleaned or restored, but taken back, piece by someone who had finally learned to say no and mean it. The invitation came on a Tuesday morning, slipped into my inbox like a dare. A digital card with gilded edges and a header in oversized script. Trevor and Maya cordially request your presence at a private estate dinner. Limited guests, formal attire, no children. I stared at it for a long moment. The location was a high-end vineyard, an hour outside of town, a place people rented for baby showers and influencer weddings. It felt more like a set than a setting. But what caught my attention wasn't the venue. It was the guest list. I recognized names: investors, journalists, 2 real estate agents, and a woman who ran a podcast about high-earning women reclaiming their narratives. That last one made me smile. Maya never missed a moment to paint herself as the bruised visionary. I closed the invite without responding. That afternoon, Trevor called. He said the dinner was important. He said it was about rebuilding trust and rebranding their public image. He said the guest list had already been finalized and it would mean a lot if I came. I let him talk. When he paused, I said only this: I'd be there, but I'd be arriving on my own terms. And I hung up. Friday evening arrived with the kind of golden light that made people believe in second chances. The vineyard sat on a bluff overlooking wide rows of Cabernet grapes, their leaves starting to turn the soft rust color of early fall. A string quartet played near the patio. White tablecloths fluttered under lanterns. Every detail screamed curated perfection. I parked down the slope, well away from the valet. I didn't wear formal attire. I wore what I always wore: dark denim, a linen blouse, and boots that had walked through mud more than once. When I stepped onto the patio, a few heads turned. One woman smiled, then whispered something to the man beside her. I didn't flinch. Maya was at the center of it all. Her dress was champagne-colored, fitted like armor, her hair in waves that likely took 2 hours to style. She moved between guests with the ease of someone hosting her own coronation. When she saw me, her face tightened, just slightly, enough for me to catch it before the performance resumed. She air-kissed my cheek and introduced me as the heart of their family, the one who had taught them everything about strength and sacrifice. I returned the smile, but I said nothing. Dinner was served under the trellis. The food was exquisite, the wine too expensive. Trevor sat across from me, his smile neutral, his posture too practiced. Emily wasn't there. Maya had said something vague about a sleepover. Then came the moment. Maya stood, tapped her glass, and thanked everyone for coming. She spoke about legacy, about vision, about how obstacles had shaped them into stronger partners. She mentioned the cabin in passing, a lesson in boundaries, a moment that taught them to prioritize relationships. She turned to me then, held her hand out. "We are honored," she said, "to have the blessing and guidance of the woman who raised this man, who stood by us even when we didn't deserve it." The applause was soft, measured. I stood slowly, smiled, and reached into my purse. I pulled out a stack of cream envelopes, each sealed, each addressed. I handed the first to Maya, the second to Trevor. The rest I placed one by one in front of each guest. Silence wrapped around the table like plastic. I cleared my throat gently and spoke. "What you're holding is a letter of intent and documentation from the county assessor. It outlines the full damage incurred at the property, including labor estimates, property violations, and psychological distress assessed by a licensed professional." I saw Maya's smile falter. I continued. "In addition, there are copies of correspondence with my legal counsel and the Homeowners Association. Included are witness statements, photographic evidence, and county records confirming your guests were not registered nor permitted for that weekend." Maya's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. Trevor's hands tightened around the envelope. "And lastly," I said, "is a formal statement of restitution. Failure to respond within 5 business days will result in escalation through the proper channels." I looked around. To be clear, this isn't revenge. It's closure. This dinner was your curtain call. Now the spotlight is mine. I picked up my purse, and I left. The fallout came fast. Monday morning, my lawyer called, said she had received 2 voicemails, an email, and 1 courier package from Maya's team. They wanted a private meeting, a discussion, a reframing. By Tuesday, the podcast host had pulled the episode promoting Maya's Family First brand. One of the investors withdrew publicly, citing concerns about ethical conduct and liability. By Wednesday, the HOA sent a mass email to all property owners, citing my case as a precedent. New rules about guest limits, property conduct, and post-event cleanup protocols were introduced. Maya and Trevor were mentioned, without names, but unmistakably. But what struck me most was Thursday. A courier arrived at my cabin with a parcel, no return address. Inside was a small velvet box and a handwritten note. It said, "You win. We understand now. We're stepping back. Do what you need to do." No signature. Just that. I placed the box on the shelf. I didn't open it. Some things are better left wrapped in silence, and some victories don't need parades, just a full night's sleep and the sound of your own breath steady in your chest. I finally exhaled, and for the first time in a long time, the cabin felt like mine again. Not just the structure, but the air, the soil, the rhythm of the trees. And in that stillness, I smiled. The morning after the dinner felt quieter than usual, but not in a peaceful way. The kind of quiet that sits too neatly, like a table set before a storm. I brewed coffee, poured it into my favorite mug, and stepped out onto the porch of my cabin. The sky held a pale haze, and the air was still. I watched the trees for a moment, half expecting something to move, to crack, to shift. But nothing did. Instead, my phone buzzed. It was a short message from my attorney. "Call me when you're ready. It's about the bank accounts." I sat down slowly, set the coffee on the armrest, and dialed. She answered on the first ring. Her tone was clipped, professional, but I could hear something beneath it. a tension that hadn't been there before. She told me there had been unauthorized activity linked to an old joint savings account I hadn't touched in years. One Trevor had access to during the years he managed some of my finances, before I wised up and took everything back under my own name. She said the bank flagged several transfers, small ones, designed to slip under typical detection thresholds. But over the span of 18 months, they had siphoned out over $30,000. And when the bank began a quiet investigation, Maya's name popped up too. She had been listed as a beneficiary on that account, without my consent. I didn't speak for a long moment, just breathed. She asked if I wanted to file a formal fraud claim. I said yes. Not because of the money, but because it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about principle, and about not letting manipulation and keep rewriting my story. The next week was a blur of paperwork and fire. The fraud case moved quickly. The evidence was too clean, too detailed. Maya and Trevor hadn't even tried to cover their tracks. They had counted on my silence, on my tiredness, on that part of me that still remembered them as children. But I was done playing quiet. The bank froze the account, issued preliminary findings, and scheduled a mediation session. My lawyer prepared a formal statement of damages, and I signed every page with a calm, steady hand. Then the emails started. Not from Maya, not from Trevor, from their attorney. The tone was smug, dismissive, wrapped in legalese that tried to dilute the facts with excuses. They claimed I had verbally consented to the transfers, that I had verbally gifted those funds to support Trevor's real estate ambitions, that this was a misunderstanding born out of generational communication gaps. I laughed when I read that last line, not because it was funny, but because it was so desperate. My lawyer responded with a counterclaim: breach of fiduciary trust, financial exploitation of a vulnerable senior, and identity falsification. Suddenly the emails stopped. 2 days later, Trevor showed up. Not at my cabin. At the county clerk's office. I saw his name on the visitor log. He was requesting a copy of the trust paperwork I had submitted earlier that month. The new one. The one that officially removed him and Maya as future beneficiaries of my estate. The one that redirected the bulk of my assets toward the women's housing project in town and a community mentorship fund for women over 60. He never got the copy. The request was denied due to lack of standing. I imagined his face when they told him, and I let myself enjoy the thought. Later that week, I met with my accountant. We reviewed everything: investments, property, retirement accounts, even the mineral rights on a parcel of land I forgot I owned. I gave her full authority to restructure my estate, transfer assets, and build a protective wall around every dollar with barbed wire and a warning sign. She looked at me after an hour and said, "You're the most prepared client I've had in 15 years." I just smiled. I wasn't preparing to die. I was preparing to live, on my own terms, without the lurking fear of being watched, weighed, or worn down. And then came the phone call. From Emily's school. It was the principal. She said Emily had been pulled out midweek without notice, that Maya had shown up, signed some paperwork, and vanished with her. No explanation, no forwarding address. I hung up and sat in silence. That was the part that hurt the most, because Emily hadn't even said goodbye. And I knew why. She wasn't allowed to. That night, I walked out to the edge of my property, past the vegetable beds, past the chicken coop, past the wooden archway I'd carved by hand one winter when the snow kept me inside for too long. I stood there as the stars began to break through the clouds, and I let the ache settle. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was no ribbon tied neatly at the top. But there was power in this moment, in knowing I hadn't lost myself in their chaos. in knowing I had drawn a line and stood firm. They had taken money, but they didn't take my name. They had taken access, but they didn't take my home. They had tried to take my legacy, but they didn't realize it had already changed form. It no longer lived in bank statements or property deeds. It lived in the quiet, in the soil, in the way I moved through the world without apology now. And maybe, someday, Emily would find her way back to that. Maybe one day, she would remember the woman who kept her warm during the storms, and maybe she'd understand why I had to let go. Not to punish, but to survive. And in surviving, to begin again. 3 weeks passed, long enough for the town to stop whispering, long enough for Trevor to stop calling, long enough for me to remember what a deep breath felt like. The mornings were still cool in the Oregon woods, and I woke each day to a silence that didn't sting anymore. It wrapped around me like a wool shawl, soft and earned. I no longer waited for footsteps on the porch, no longer looked at my phone to see if Emily had sent something, anything. A photo, a note, a sticker. She hadn't. And I had stopped reaching out. That didn't mean I didn't love her. It meant I had chosen to stop pouring into a cup with a crack down the middle. Because in the end, no matter how careful, the water always leaked through. One Friday afternoon, I received a letter. A physical one. White envelope, handwritten address, no return name. But the handwriting, I knew it immediately. Emily's. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper, torn from one of those spiral-bound pads I used to help her organize for school. It was short. No date, no greeting. It read, "I'm okay. I miss you. I'm sorry I can't talk right now. I'll find a way. Please don't stop waiting for me." It wasn't much, but I held it like it was a treasure map. I didn't cry. I just sat with it. For hours. And for the first time in a long while, I let hope breathe next to me. The following week, I received notice from my attorney. Trevor and Maya had filed a motion to dismiss the fraud case. They were now claiming that I was mentally unfit when I signed the revised trust. It was laughable. They even submitted a doctor's note, one that had never involved a single meeting with me. A paper diagnosis. My attorney smiled when she told me. She said, "This is what people do when they have no defense left. They throw mud and hope it sticks." But I had already cleaned my walls. We filed our response the next day, along with letters from my doctors, my accountant, my notary public, and 2 neighbors who had witnessed my clarity and independence. And then we filed one more thing. A subpoena for Maya's personal financial records over the last 2 years. I didn't need to guess what we'd find. On the morning of the mediation hearing, I dressed in navy blue slacks, a cream blouse, and the same boots I wore the day I walked out of Trevor's house. I drove myself. No assistant, no escort, no dramatics, just me. The meeting was held in a neutral office space, long glass walls, a wide conference table, 2 lawyers per side. A mediator seated dead center. Maya arrived before Trevor. Her face was tight, her jaw locked, her movements stiff. She didn't look at me once. Trevor came in 5 minutes later. He looked smaller, not physically, just less full of himself. And that was all the energy I gave them, because the paperwork did the rest. Over an hour, my lawyer went line by line, transfer by transfer, signature by signature. The mediator listened, nodded, asked for clarification. When it came time for Trevor's lawyer to speak, he barely lifted his voice. He pushed forward a slim folder with 3 pages of defense, none of which addressed the charges directly. The mediator turned to Maya and Trevor. He said one sentence. "I need to ask, is any of this inaccurate?" Neither of them spoke. Not a sound. The silence in that room told me everything I ever needed to know about who they had become. And it told me I had been right to walk away. The final decision wouldn't come for 2 more weeks, but I already knew how it would end. So I didn't wait. I went home. I planted winter vegetables. I baked again. I sat in my garden with a book open but unread, because my thoughts were no longer chasing what had been lost. They were busy making room for what would be built next. 2 nights before the ruling came in, I heard a knock on my door. It was almost 9 o'clock. I opened it slowly, and there she stood. Emily, hair tangled, jacket too big, her hands stuffed into her sleeves. She looked up at me and didn't say anything at first. Then she whispered, I ran away. I couldn't take it anymore. I opened the door fully. She stepped inside. We didn't speak. I didn't ask her anything. I just wrapped my arms around her. And she didn't let go. Later, over tea, she told me the truth. About how Maya screamed at her for asking about the letter. About how Trevor didn't speak to her unless it was about grades. About the cameras installed in her bedroom, supposedly for safety. About the money they had promised her in the future, only if she stayed silent. I sat and listened, and I didn't interrupt. When she finished, she asked quietly, Can I stay with you? I nodded. You never even had to ask. It didn't fix everything, but it changed the shape of the road ahead. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just standing still, I was walking forward. And this time, I wasn't walking alone. I stood at the edge of my porch that morning, coffee cooling in my hand, watching the sun cut through the mist crawling across the pines. The air tasted different, clean, mine. It was the first morning in years that didn't start with a demand, a slammed door, or the sound of my name being misused. After the hearing, news had spread quickly. The court had ruled the trust irrevocable. The transfer of assets I had made before their visit was binding and final. My cabin, my land, the community programs I launched, they were untouchable. And the frozen accounts that once lined Brendan and Kayla's lives with comfort had now been redirected to the very people they looked down on. They didn't take it well. Brendan tried to save face. He called, left long voicemails pretending it was all a misunderstanding, that he missed me, that Kayla had pressured him, that the kids wanted to see me. But the kids never wanted anything to do with me. They barely remembered I existed, and the few times I'd reached out, I got back radio silence or one-word texts. Their loyalty was transactional, and my balance had been emptied long ago. I didn't answer Brendan. I didn't need to. Silence had become my language. And sometimes, silence was the loudest thing in the room. Kayla, however, made sure her wrath echoed. She blasted me online, accusing me of elder manipulation, hiding money, controlling the family through fear. But no one bought it. Not after her fraud came to light. Not after the investigator's report exposed how she coached Brendan into filing power of attorney documents I never consented to. Not after they saw the videos from the cabin's cameras, the ones I had installed, quietly right after I moved in. She vanished after that. Their fancy home went on sale. Their cars disappeared from the driveway. I heard through the grapevine Brendan was applying for jobs again. Real jobs. Not the kind that come with a private office and no responsibilities, but jobs where you clock in and earn every dollar. It felt like poetic symmetry. The son who once told me I was too old, too useless, now forced to build from scratch. The daughter-in-law who screamed that I had nothing, now stripped of the power she thought money guaranteed. But revenge wasn't the end. That wasn't what this was for me. I started walking into town more. People waved now, some stopped to chat. I helped the librarian set up a reading circle for women over 60. I signed the deed for the non-profit that would use the land behind my cabin to build small homes for older women left behind. Women like me. And then one day, Martina showed up again. She parked the same blue truck in my driveway and leaned against the hood, arms crossed, a warm, quiet look on her face. I didn't need to ask why she came. She handed me a manila envelope. Inside was a photo, a young woman, tears in her eyes, holding a set of keys. She had been one of the first applicants accepted to the housing program, a survivor, a mother, a woman who had been sleeping in her car for nearly a year. She had a home now, a place to start again. I stared at the photo until the sun dipped below the treetops. This was it. This was the legacy I had waited a lifetime to create. Not what I left behind, but what I started. Not the family I was born into, but the family I chose to build. Not the cabin I ran to, but the life I built inside it. For once, I didn't feel like someone's burden, someone's stepping stone, someone's forgotten mother. I was just me, free, and finally home. If you've ever been made to feel like your worth depends on what you give, not who you are, I hope this story reached you. What would you have done in my place? Stayed silent or stood your ground? Your thoughts matter to me. Share your own journey in the comments, because sometimes our stories are what remind others they're not alone. Thank you for listening.